So I welcome you to our next DKU talk. So my name is Shairbek Dzhuraev. I'm the Volkswagen Research Fellow, Volkswagen Foundation postdoc research fellow at the German Kazakh University and senior lecturer at this university. So I welcome everybody. So today we're going to talk about the U.S. foreign policy towards Central Asia after 2020 presidential elections in the U.S. Just 2 months ago, we had presidential elections in the United States. That election was won by as we already know, so that election was won by the Democratic candidate Joe Biden. Today, 20th of January, the inauguration of the president-elect is going to take place. So what direction will his foreign policy, or what direction will the U.S. foreign policy towards Central Asia take during the Joe Biden's presidential term? What changes we will see in the U.S. foreign policy during Joe Biden's term? So we will discuss this and other questions with in this talk today. So to discuss all these questions, I'm joined by Shairbek Dzhuraev, the Volkswagen Foundation Research Fellow at the OSCE Academy, and in Bishkek, and the director of the Central Asian Crossroads Institute, also in Bishkek. And Iskander Akylbaev, the executive director of the Kazakh Council for International Relations in Kazakhstan, Nur-Sultan. So welcome, Iskander and Shairbek, and thank you very much for agreeing to take part in this discussion. So just a couple of organizational questions, organizational issues before we begin. So we have around 20 people joining us today. So live, so we have online audience joining us today for this discussion. So don't wait for us to prompt you for questions. So if you have any questions, just put your questions in the chat, so I will address these questions to our panelists. So, and I will be the moderator of this discussion, so I forgot to mention. So just to begin this discussion, and without any further go, I'd like to begin by asking you guys, so Shairbek and Iskander, to give a short summary or a brief summary of key achievements of Trump's foreign policy in Central Asia during his term. So we all know that Trump's foreign policy was anything but constructive. So some even say his foreign policy was very erratic. So, but I would like to hear from you, what was his major achievements? So what was the major achievements of his foreign policy, or the foreign policy of his foreign policy during his term towards Central Asia? So, Shairbek, perhaps you may ask you.
Thank you, Shairbek. Thank you, everyone. It's great to see you all here. So, Shairbek, can you let us know how much time we have for the first introduction?
Yeah, it's very important. So, so normally we have one and a half hours, so maximum 2 hours for this discussion. So it depends on what topic we have and how many questions we have.
So I can take about 10-12 minutes, I guess, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yes, 10-15 minutes.
Okay, thank you very much again. It's a pleasure to be here, and you all chose a appropriate day today. Probably when it's night in Central Asia, the United States will get finally their new president officially take the office. Shairbek, through some questions right now to start with assessing Donald Trump's legacy in Central Asia. But if you would allow, if I take a little bit of zooming out exercise to look at the broader picture, probably because one may not need 10 or 12, 15 minutes to speak about Trump period of foreign policy of the United States in Central Asia. But so if I take as a hook the biggest question of what should we expect about the United States foreign policy in Central Asia once Joe Biden becomes the president, to take that question, and then I'll go into some broader topics. So first couple of caveats. One is that obviously we cannot have Chatham House rules once we're online. I don't know if it's streamed, but anyway, it's being recorded. But a caveat is that my view would be very much academic. So in some areas we are not informed. Academics do not know what policymakers know, and academics tend to have their particular viewpoints sometimes informed by theoretical readings and interpretation of what foreign policy is and so on. So this is not kind of a policy statements on the United States history of engagement with Central Asia. Anyway, so if we take the first question of what should we expect, the very quick, short answer from me would be that I don't think we should expect any big major changes in the United States foreign policy in Central Asia. That's a very short answer, and I think it requires some explanation. When we, and students know it perfectly, when we try to assess or forecast change, it's very important to know what's our baseline, what are we comparing to. That makes us to look back to the United States engagement with Central Asia over the past 30 years. And of course, we cannot make thorough analysis here, but I would like to point out that there are several reasons first for why Central Asia will not be very much high in the radar of the Biden's foreign policy. First, because Biden is becoming president at a very difficult period of time, not only for the world, but also for the United States. One problem is, of course, the COVID, and the pandemic has been, the coronavirus has been playing out in the United States particularly badly. And his administration will have lots of resources to dedicated to catching up with whatever policies and decisions are required on that front. Second, the Trump legacy. Everywhere, be it in the politics, the political divisions within the United States, the issues on economy, the international relations, everything that Trump did and everything on which Biden disagreed, he'll have lots of, the plate will be full from issues starting with, say, NATO and the United States role in NATO, US role in general multilateral organizations worldwide, Russia, China policies, and so on. So Central Asia has already been quite small and quite objectively, there's no offense to anyone, but it will remain so in the coming future. Now, if I quickly turn to the key drivers of the United States foreign policy that I think have been behind the US in Central Asia over the past years, the first was, and probably to some extent remains, the issue of political regimes and democratization. When the Soviet Union collapsed, the United States was, of course, obviously the number one, the winner of the Cold War, the richest country, the most powerful, and supporting the newly independent states in their integration to the world community by developing market economies, by developing the democratic systems, has been the trademark, the flagship issue of the United States foreign policy. That basically applies to the 90s. If we remember, at least we remember, we were school students, and that was a period when the United States foreign policy was very much about supporting the government initiatives on policy reforms, supporting civil society, supporting media freedom, supporting even political parties, their workshops to train and build up the capacity of political parties, human rights, and so on. That's basically relevant to the 90s. Mm-hmm. So, and second comes the security issues. And here we move to post 9/11 period, the Afghanistan, the war on terror, and Central Asia becomes more important as a partner or ally of the US and the international coalition doing wars in Afghanistan. So we became the host of 2 military bases supporting the operations in Afghanistan. I think it's 9/11 basically upgraded Central Asia's status for the United States policymakers, but as many academics are writing everywhere, that had very detrimental effect on the first component, the democratization. So people started speaking about 2 paradigms clashing within the US policymakers' mindset. One is the paradigm of Pentagon or DoD, security is the first pragmatic approach, and the other is, be it democracy promotion, USAID, State Department kind of. So at least in Kyrgyzstan, I think there is a quite large consensus that with the arrival of the Manas Air Base, with the emergence of Manas Air Base, the United States' support for democratic processes, for civil society, for media, has been overshadowed by the cooperation on security with the government. Now, security is also not high on the agenda with the withdrawal from Afghanistan, and in general, after 2014 or so, even when Obama's first term, US has been basically withdrawing from the region. And finally, there is geopolitics. At least some academics and policy analysts suggest that one thing that keeps the United States interested in the region is the proximity of China and Russia. And of course, we know that the US-Russian, US-Chinese relations are big topics. They're probably very much high on the agenda, will be agenda for the Biden. And Central Asia is located next to China and in the backyard of Russia, as the cliche phrases tell us. However, even here, I think that we should not be really expecting the United States to start engaging in some sort of great game and trying to squeeze out any of Russia or China or try to compete for the influence. The Russian and Chinese policies of the United States will be going on, but Central Asia is far from being central arena where US will be engaging with either Russia or China. So there is not big game here to play for the United States. And I don't think that the American policymakers have much hopes for big progress. So overall, I think that if we term a bit of kind of extreme terms, the United States foreign policy will remain kind of sluggish, low-powered engagement by the standards of our expectations. Of course, the United States is such a country that it cannot disappear. It will not withdraw completely. And even the United States low-powered engagement will be much more active than the engagement of many other countries who are in active phase. So be it on security issues, on the political reforms, on Central Asia's engagement with Russia or China, United States will remain a big shadow. However, if you compare it to US engagement in the 90s and the 2000s, I think the Biden administration will be more of a continuation of late Obama and Trump periods of kind of low engagement or even disengagement from Central Asia. So if I stop here and leave out the rest of the points for the questions and answers, because I might be taking too long. Thank you, Sarah.
Thank you, Shairbek. So I will come back to some of the issues that you raised in your presentation. So I will come back to some of them after Iskander's presentation. So Iskander, may I address this question to you as well? So where do you see? I mean, what do you make of the US past foreign policy towards Central Asia, perhaps particularly in Kazakhstan? So what do you make of are there any achievements? I mean, to you? Could you please summarize?
Yeah, sir, thank you very much for really kind invitation. I think this event is very timely due to the inauguration ceremony, which will happen today at 7:45 according to Almaty time. So it's the day is very symbolic, and I believe the question you raised is quite important because, as rightly Shairbek mentioned, we need to compare the Trump's legacy with the Obama administration or previous administrations, whether they are Republicans or Democrats. So as it was mentioned by Shairbek, that kind of vested interest into the Central Asian region has been deriving from the Afghanistan and since the early 2000s. And from that time, the main agenda for US looking towards Central Asia was mainly security issues. Terrorism, security issues, and gradually what we can see, they have been developing their strategy, deviating purely from the security mechanisms of engagement with Central Asian region towards more humanitarian, diplomatic relations, human rights, etc. And what we see from the legacy of Trump administration towards Central Asia, so Trump's administration was quite pragmatic towards our region, and Mainly, they were continuing the Obama policy and specific framework called as C5+1, and which was launched by the Obama administration. Like last year, there was a new strategy which was released in the February of 2020, where they actually didn't change much in the vocabulary, in diplomatic vocabulary towards Central Asia. But what actually changed is specific signals towards neighboring states, specifically, namely China and Russia, and take into account Trump's kind of rising tensions with China and claim towards Xinjiang region and trade wars. Certainly, the Trump's administration tried to put some kind of awareness to the sovereignty, like let's make business with U.S. and former Secretary Pompeo's visit to Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan. He actually has openly stated that it's better to work on the business level with U.S. because of the standards, transparency, etc. So Trump's administration was quite open in taking the part in Central Asian business. And but in fact, if you look at the strategy which was released last year, out of 6 points which are stated there, like 3 points are related directly and indirectly towards Afghanistan. So Afghanistan is was still, in Trump's vision, was still main focal point in this region. And what's related to Central Asia, 5 Central Asian republics, is certainly Central Asian cooperation, economic partnership. We need to increase our connectivity and build up a sovereignty, strengthen the sovereignty issues. And if you look at the latest statements by the Russian kind of members of the Congress or Duma, some of the U.S. experts has been claiming that it was justified, it was legitimate claim just to put sovereignty issue in the latest U.S. strategy towards Central Asia. And if you look at the 2018, when the President Nazarbayev and President Mirziyoyev actually met with Trump in Washington, D.C., I was a member of the kind of not official but media delegation, which where we traveled to D.C. and covering the media aspect of the meeting of President Nazarbayev, former President Nazarbayev, with President Trump. So we see a lot of pragmatism in this respect. And there was other meetings on the sidelines on different venues with other Central Asian leaders in this respect. So Trump was quite pragmatic towards Central Asia, but certainly with a rise of geopolitical kind of tensions in the Eurasian region, specifically with Iran, with Russia and China, the tension towards Central Asia has been a little bit increasing, has a little bit increased in this respect. And but nothing drastic, no dramatic change in this respect. So I believe the Biden's administration towards Central Asia will not kind of pass through big transformation in this regard. So that's why I believe Trump, I mean, despite the discrepancies with the Obama administration, had been following his steps in this respect. And Central Asia was not kind of the focal point in the Eurasian region. It was more important to build up kind of this American first policy. And that's why if you look at the White House National Security Council, during the Obama administration, there was a specific department on Russia and Central Asia. But with Trump, it was advent of Trump's administration that Russia Central Asia Department was combined with European department. And so in diplomatically speaking, they tried to kind of diverse the European link Russia to Europe. But with a new Biden's administration, they have once again redesignated Russia and Central Asia Department for kind of newly appointed Andrea Taylor, who will kind of will take this role as a head of the Russia and Central Asia Department at the White House National Security Council. So we see that the Biden's approach towards Russia will be more kind of vivid in this respect when you come up to when you compare it to the Trump's administration. So basically, this is how I see the legacy as a continuation. with some kind of changes in the signaling towards regional neighbors.
Yeah, my microphone isn't working. Thank you, Iskander. Thank you very much. So we'll come to the Biden still, Biden's foreign policy a little bit later. So perhaps in the second part of our discussion. So you both guys, I mean, Shairbek and Iskander, you mentioned that the US foreign policy has become more. So now we see, right now we see less engagement as compared to the 1990s. So the US foreign policy towards our region has become more pragmatic. So may I ask you to be more specific? So when this shift, I mean, towards more pragmatism happened, I mean, in the US approach towards our region, once the US did, I mean, become so much pragmatic, and why the US has become less engaged, so right now in the 20s,
just to continue my kind of,
as compared to 1990s.
Yeah,
why
just to continue my
happening?
idea. If you look at the hierarchy of the topics which are being raised in US kind of foreign policy, and if you look at the strategy, latest US strategy towards Central Asia, you see that the security, economic connectivity, cooperation is one of the key elements, and then maybe the number 3 and number 4 is the human rights and democracy, etc. So you see that the topic specifically towards human rights has been kind of is still there, but it's not the highest priority in this respect. So that's why I claim it to be more pragmatic in this respect.
And we may add that on the one hand, as a foreign policy analysis, it's a bit tricky to designate foreign policy to be more pragmatic and less pragmatic. Any policy is pragmatic, and if it's not a pragmatic, it's not really a policy or very unsuccessful policy. Of course, when we speak about democratization or human rights to be the cornerstone of a foreign policy, we sort of imply that this is a normative, change-oriented policy, which may not be pragmatic, but if you are a US policymaker, supporting democracies worldwide has been, of course, a very pragmatic, long-term view of how the world should be developing. So I don't think that any part could be more or less pragmatic, but of course the focus areas have been changing. And in my view, the biggest change came, there is no one single point, but one is the 9/11, which just brought in, particularly in Central Asia, Central Asia became just a neighborhood of Afghanistan, and Afghanistan became the biggest point of security threat, and so on and so on. But not less importantly, the successful or failures of democratization in Central Asia has also been a major factor why the enthusiasm about supporting human rights and democracy waned over time. The progress of if you take Kyrgyzstan, you might have some progress, but Islam Karimov's Uzbekistan, developments in Tajikistan, Turkmenistan is a separate story. Overall, as Thomas Carter's article summarized in 2002, the whole paradigm of democratization failed in the understanding of the 90s. And so I think that was also part of that. You cannot keep funding something unless you can show some progress. So that's why Georgia and Ukraine became some kind of flashpoints. Wow, that the Rose Revolution, Orange Revolution, there's something playing out. But there was not much more other than that, where we could show that democratization succeeded in this broader region. Yeah, so developments in Central Asia and 9/11 were probably the biggest points. And then when Trump replaces Obama, Obama's focus on human rights, on issues like gender, LGBT, and so on, Trump, I think, being just less interested in those issues. And Trump has been, I think, more blunt about issues that are not really central. So if we don't really care much, if Central Asians don't care much about, let's just drop it. So Trump's kind of more of business-like, or we can, of course, create this beautiful term for Trump being more pragmatic or more businesslike, but I think it was de facto disengagement and the efforts to gather C5+1 and deliver some message about Central Asians tackling Chinese influence more proactively. That was too little, too late, and probably too symbolic. And there was not much of policy follow-up after the Pompeo visit and those statements. And I don't think even in Washington, they expected much of follow-up from Central Asia after the visit. So here I stop. Thank you.
Guys, so I might be mistaken, but I mean, we're all used, I mean, to think that the U.S. foreign policy is about great game. So and that they look at us like a part of a great game. But my question is it really? I mean, how the U.S. Foreign policy makers look at us? I mean, are we I mean, Central Asians? Are we a part of a great game going on the world stage? I mean, between the U.S. and other foreign policy players? Or is it the wrong assessment?
Well, I think there are different strategic thinking in US, specifically on in general sense, how we're going to approach the global affairs. And speaking frankly, it's possible to ask the question, how central is Central Asia? Yeah, and I believe that economically speaking, we're not so very much attractive to the kind of the big players. But we might have indirect effect of this kind of great power game between Washington, Moscow, and Beijing. So speaking about like their tensions, and it can indirectly affect us on our currency, on our economy, etc. So we see some statements from the Russian side, Chinese side, and US side, specifically on Central Asia, whether Kazakhstan has to work with in specific areas with US. On healthcare and issues or in this regard. And I believe that Central Asia is not very much kind of central in this respect if there is a great game approach from the US side. But I certainly believe that they have their own interests as any country, as any big stakeholder in the world has their own interest in this region. But at this stage, I believe we are not in the center of the interest. But as indirectly, we might be interesting for them to just test some policies with the big players like China and Russia.
Was this question a little bit different?
Just to add, overall, I agree with Iskander's assessment of how Central Asia is a big question. Just an academic's point of view here is that the whole discourse of great game derives to big extent from academic policy analysis and commentator circles. And this is basically about kind of applying a terminology or label to policies. And it makes it beautiful, it makes sellable, it makes articles and books looks more interesting. But overall, I think it's quite an outdated and almost irrelevant notion that some people still keep using it when referring to US or Russia policies in Central Asia. The references, of course, is to the actual great game of those in the 19th century, but even then, it was just a label applied to kind of describe the kind of relations between British Empire and Russian Empire. But today, on the one hand, it's obvious that Russia and China are biggest actors that US is interested. Russia for the reason of nuclear weapons and energy resources to less extent. China is for the massive economic growth, which will probably cannot be stopped anyhow by the United States. So US is trying to find ways of kind of peaceful transition into the world where China will be the #1 economy. So those are two important topics for the United States, and Central Asia is a tiny actor where there's no game to be played. And if we insist on a game analogy, then I think the United States already understands that it doesn't have interest or resources or willingness to compete with Chinese credits, for example, that being poured into Central Asia's economies. And there's no way it's very difficult for the United States or Europe to compete with Russian influence in terms of human exchange, in terms of, let's call it cultural, linguistic, or soft power in general. In Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, we have almost 20% of our population traveling between Russia and our countries on a daily basis. So there's not much of a game there, but overall, I would urge, especially if we have students in the group, to approach more critically this notion of great game and competition, and try other theoretical lenses to assess the US policy in Central Asia.
Guys, can I please qualify? So you both mentioned that the US foreign policy has become very pragmatic. So I do agree with you, but let me clarify. By saying that US foreign policy has become more pragmatic, do you mean that so the US they pay more attention to security issues rather than to the issues of human rights and democratization, etc., as it was the case in the 1990s?
Well, from my viewpoint, is that U.S. approach towards Central Asia, they tried their policy specifically on democratization, human rights in the 90s, and if you look at the U.S. foreign policy towards Russia, and there was kind of the Boris Yeltsin's administration, they were kind of willing to cooperate with U.S. and even Russia was kind of being linked to be part of the NATO, etc. So. In early 2000, the meeting between President Putin and President Bush, and when Bush said, like, I look at his soul, I look at him and find kind of his soul, etc. So there was some kind of detent between Russia and US in this respect, and certainly affected us. And US saw that there is opportunity for kind of broader democratization process, and it actually affected Central Asia in this respect because we tried to attract investments, we tried to make it more sellable towards like Western companies, etc. So in this respect, the pragmatism from the US comes with the high importance of kind of Central Asian, more Central Asian cooperation. And I think they test and they compare whether we should invest more on uniting Central Asia. And that's why the belated framework C5+1 came after the several examples from Japan, European Union, and South Korea, etc. So in this respect, I believe US is more interested in building up a regional cooperation, in strengthening sovereignty vis-a-vis the regional players, and democratization and democracy, those issues are still on the agenda. But certainly, firstly, they understand pragmatically that it's necessary to build up economic cooperation and kind of regional vision to strengthen their sovereignty, independence in this regard.
Yeah. So we have a question from our audience. So, Akarim would like to tune in. Your microphone, Akarim. No.
Maybe a question from my side.
Okay, so we have another question. So Akarim, if it's possible, you can write your question into the chat. So yeah,
okay,
post the question
good.
in the chat. Yeah. So Guy, Mr. Bonvin, was it you? Yeah, I think.
Yes, good. You can see me, I hope so. Good afternoon. Thank you very much for this very interesting talk. So my role is Special Envoy for Water in Central Asia from the Swiss government. My question to both the speakers, okay, you described the pragmatism of the American policy in the region. In your opinion, do you see them willing to have a coherent common region, a bit more autonomous region, or they are more interested in, say, in a divided region, to say something a little bit direct? And an additional point, they are very much involved also in the energy through USAID region. So how is there policy looking just beyond pragmatic things like energy trading and these kind of things? Because I think this is an important aspect also regarding vital resource like mining resource and these kind of things. And my last point, I put it already in the chat. I think there is a big elephant in the room in the region. This is Iran, and which has because part of the region is clearly influenced by Farsi culture, Farsi language, and Farsi policies. And I think this is something also quite important. Thank you for your time.
So, and so said. So, Iskander, perhaps you?
No, thank you very much, Mr. Bonvin. And I think this question related to the new administration, Biden's administration, and his outlook towards Central Asia. And if you look at the cabinet and the appointees he selected, and most of them, and kind of they are certainly from the Democratic leaning camp, and some of them they had former experience working with President Obama, Obama's administration. And if you look at the key kind of positions, specifically on the climate, when he appointed John Kerry, for example, in his cabinet, and Jake Sullivan, who was who is now appointed as the youngest national security advisor at the age of 43, and he was the youngest director for policy planning at the Obama administration at that time. So if you look at the Victoria Nuland, who is known in the Central Asia and Eurasia and during Obama administration, and she's known for her assertive stance towards Russia. I believe in this respect, certainly U.S. would like to continue the C5+1 foreign policy towards Central Asia, and not seeing the Central Asian region as divided. They will support the cooperation in this region economically and in the sphere of energy, etc. So U.S. companies are early present in Kazakhstan, specifically in the oil and gas sector. If you look at the year 2020, despite the pandemic, there was a really high activities between U.S. and Uzbekistan on the economic level, partnership level, and recently there was a Central Asia investment partnership which was signed, and where the Kazakhstan and Uzbekistan are the key stakeholders in this regard. So I believe that economically speaking, we will see a little bit more activity from the economic partnership between U.S. and Central Asia.
Shairbek, the one to add?
Right, yeah, very briefly on the divided or united region. I think it's probably irrelevant even to speak about the extremes, but in general, I understand the point, and I agree with Iskander that any big partner of Central Asia would most likely be interested in the region which is peaceful and cooperating with each other. I don't think any external actors have any hopes about the region being united. In the 90s, it was very fashionable to speak about Central Asian integration as a particular sub-region of the former Soviet Union. But over time, it became clear that that's not going to happen. And successfully managing our conflicts over the borders, over water resources, is already seen as a big mark of success. So as long as we avoid hot conflicts, particularly in the Fergana Valley area between Tajik or Kyrgyz-Uzbek borders, where most conflicts occur, that's already seen as a major success. I don't think anyone hopes that Kyrgyzstan and Turkmenistan, for example, are becoming a part of a particularly united region. But as long as there's a stability and peace, that is what the external powers would like to have, because when there's a conflict, then lots of other issues start emerging and other players start playing completely new games, and that's not really in the interest of most powers. As for the Iran, I think I completely agree that Iran actually, not even outside the context of Central Asia, Iran will be an elephant, maybe not elephant. Any room cannot have too many elephants. So if China and Russia are elephants, then we should come up with a different animal for Iran. But indeed, the Trump's leaving of the agreement with Iran and Biden's dilemma will be how we bring Iran back to the table, on what terms, and what will be Iran's response now, and what are the other multilateral partners' position. But as for Central Asia, to be honest, I don't think that Iran is a major actor. Iran has been maintaining certain engagement, but it's hard to even compare to, say, Turkey. Turkey in the 90s, when Turkey was planning that, okay, Central Asian countries form our kind of brother nations, and we may become a big Turkic region. Iran, even with Tajikistan, Iran has very ambiguous relations with ups and downs. And beyond Tajikistan, Iran has, of course, in Turkmenistan, a very pragmatic engagement in business and so on. But in terms of issues that concern the United States in Central Asia, I don't think Iran is very much high on the radar in the hierarchy of issues. And as for the second question on energy, maybe I leave it to representatives of energy-rich countries. In Kyrgyzstan, we don't trade energy with United States. But I think I missed a question, but probably as long as it's on the how energy will be featuring in the United States engagement with Central Asia, my impression is overall is that the energy of Central Asia is pretty much booked to a great extent by China and by Russia. And overall, with the change within the energy sector, the importance of the resources has been not as high as in the late 90s or early 2000s. So probably it will not be a major issue, but again, Iskander might know much more about the intricacies of energy-related cooperation.
Okay, and perhaps Agirim would like to ask a question? No, Agirim, it's not working. Your mic is not working, Agirim, so sorry. I'm not hearing you. Okay, so guys, I would like to come back to this question Mr. Bondman asked you. So regarding this integration in Central Asia, I mean, how genuine is the interest of US that the Central Asian countries integrate? So there is this meeting platform or discussion platform C5+1. I mean, how effective this mechanism this platform is, and because I feel so much criticism about this platform. For example, let me give you a quote. One comment comes from Alejandro Sanchez in Geopolitical Monitor in 2019. So Washington's default foreign policy tool to approach this geographically distant area is C5+1, which is, so I quote, currently resembles more concomitant occasional gathering of acquaintances rather than a serious mechanism for allied governments set on challenging Beijing and Moscow's influence. I mean, would you agree with that statement? So that the C5+1 mechanism tool is not, the platform is not working as it was expected from initially.
Well, it's certainly we need to ask what was expected in the beginning. I mean, I believe that
one of the goals was that to foster integration in the region, etc., with the help of the US. Yes.
I remember when this initiative was first launched in 2015. I believe there were different points on energy, security, cooperation, economic aspects as well, and there were. Pragmatically speaking and frankly speaking, the amount of money which was kind of given, it was $15 million for whole Central Asian region. So it's not so big. I mean, if you compare to this kind of Chinese initiatives, etc., so European Union initiatives, it's comparatively low, speaking about the budget. And I believe the C5+1 has more diplomatic relations and kind of has kind of more symbolic engagement in the Central Asian region. And speaking about Japanese initiative towards Central Asia, or India's initiative towards Central Asia, they have more this kind of political and diplomatical aspect of that, and kind of mechanism of engagement. And I believe in this respect, the expectations were not so high even from the US side. It might be the expectation might be high from some kind of political analysts or some specific groups who wanted more engagement. from the US towards Central Asia, vis-a-vis, just to counterbalance Russia and China. But I believe the US understands its like geographic distance and its influence in the region. And I just recommend you to read the report by Paul Stronsky from the Carnegie Endowment. It's called the Central Asia 3.0 from the US foreign policy towards Central Asia. And he clearly stated that US is quite pragmatic and yet understands its limits in the region. That's why C5+1, I believe it was not created just to kind of influence or kind of promote aggressively US interests. It's just, I believe the C5+1 platform was to build a kind of a mechanism, cooperation mechanism with US on legal terms in this respect.
Yeah, absolutely. I think overall I agree very much on this being a symbolic institution. In general, Japan or Korea or India are the actors that are far away, very distant, with very limited engagement level with Central Asia. And it's quite striking that the United States is applying that model. And in that sense, I think we can view the C5+1 as exit strategy, that United States, it is actually a symbol of disengaging United States, which will want to retain a particular platform where we would regularly meet. That's one kind of pessimist or skeptic's interpretation. But still, in the foreign policy, in diplomatic relations, in international relations, symbolic things can change over time and become less meaningful or more meaningful, depending on the policy drivers from each side. In general, I think I like the format very much. At least even without the United States, it's always great to see 5 foreign ministers meeting with each other. I don't know whether they meet now or they use Zoom or Skype, but 5 Central Asian leaders or ministers rarely meet on their own. So it's been thanks to the European Union, this Mogherini's similar format, or the United States, or the other multilateral platforms where 5 leaders meet. So in general, I think as a platform where they can meet, as a platform for dialogue, it's good, but I would not overblow the expectations. It's just ad hoc meetings. There's not even secretariat or some kind of office that would take notes of what was being discussed and what would be the follow-up. In that sense, European Union's format of similar scale is much more deeper in the coverage of policy issues with other dialogue instruments operating in parallel. With the United States, I think it's more of kind of ad hoc, standalone initiative, but which is still much better than not having that.
Correct. So till now we've been discussing the US perspective on Central Asia, or the US approach towards Central Asia. But let me ask you a question, what I'm curious about is how we in Central Asia look at the US. I mean, do the Central Asians need US at all? I mean, the Central Asian leaders or policymakers. I mean, do they look at US? I don't know. With a heart filled with love, or how we say it in English, I don't know. So do we need more US engagement in our region? So, or do we seek such engagement and our policymakers? Iskander, so you make it.
I believe that, like in specifically speaking about Kazakhstan and in general sense, all the Central Asian republics has been trying to balance different interests from different stakeholders, and Kazakhstan has been promoting its multi-vector foreign policy, and the US is a strategic partner for Kazakhstan, and I believe the same goes to other Central Asian republics. And we have the longest border with Russia, we have border with China, and they also are strategic partners. And in a kind of the Kazakh style of diplomacy is just to balance and bind between the different layers, because we understand our limits, and we understand that the only way to prosperity and economic kind of viability is through cooperation. And that's why I believe that US economic presence and humanitarian presence is welcomed. Why not? And we are trying not to play different games engage with kind of different games from other side. And I believe that economically speaking, there were some cases specifically from the US companies, not only in energy sector, but also in food production, like Tyson Food, one of the biggest US companies in the meat production sector, has invested into Kazakhstan. And we see the US kind of economic giants coming to Uzbekistan, etc. So, and it's possible to anticipate the small and medium-sized enterprises from US trying to investigate opportunities in Central Asia in sector of IT or healthcare, for example, or online business. So I believe that, this trend is open for discussion, and it's possible to see some kind of intentions from the both sides to find a common ground in better and further economic cooperation.
To add to that, Shairbek, I think you raised a very important question, and very often in Central Asia we have conferences and roundtables discussing others' policies towards Central Asia, but rarely we cover Central Asia's policy towards, say, European Union or Russia or United States. Of course, this is a reflection of the fact that we are a small and poor region, relatively speaking, and we're on the recipient side. Whatever happens between the United States and Central Asia is determined more by United States and less by Central Asia. Nevertheless, we are independent states, and increasingly so, to be a bit sarcastic. And we should be discussing more critically within our own domestic audiences, what do we want from engaging, from foreign policy in general, and from engaging with particular actors. However, there's a trick here. If Shairbek asks, do Central Asians or do we need United States, then we should define who we are. If we mean Central Asian leaders, the ruling governments, ruling regimes, that answer may be a bit different from speaking to civil society activists or private businesses. Overall, I think Central Asian countries, of course, benefit from closer engagement with the United States. After all, the United States is an economic superpower, powerhouse. Politically and security-wise, it's the biggest actor, very influential. Of course, Central Asian leaders would like the United States not to be too active in sensitive areas for them, which is political pluralism, ensuring actually free and fair elections, and so on. And that's where we say that, okay, if the United States start becoming more active, then there's a path for conflict, and people point to, say, the Arab Spring or Ukraine and so on. Nevertheless, that issue aside, and I don't think the United States is very much enthusiastic about democratization anyway, Central Asian leaders would always prefer having more embassies, more active players, including China, Russia, European Union, and the United States, because when some of them start really withdrawing from the region, Central Asia will have much more troubled relationship with the remaining ones. Mm-hmm. So indeed, multi-vector or this balancing policy is a default strategy for all Central Asian states. We have particular history with Russia. Some people may still say that we are still part of Russia. For some, it's kind of history of colonization, depending on where you stand. And China, if you just look at the map and the discrepancy between the size of the economy of China and Central Asia, you realize that Central Asians are and must be interested in having more options open and having great opportunity to balance in any areas. So we need the United States, we need Russia, we need China, we need the European Union. But what is needed is this kind of roundtables that would be hosted or at least attended by policymakers, so that they can make informed decisions, so that the foreign policies of our countries is not kind of opaque sphere where decisions are made within between 3 or 4 people sitting in cabinet somewhere, but reflect the societal agreement, societal consensus on who we are what do we want to do in our foreign policy, in our engagement with the world. That would be more inclusive, more democratic, let's say, foreign policy, but I think we have some way to go towards that.
Well, certainly, yes, thank you very much, first of all, Shairbek. So why I ask these questions, because, and to be more specific, so in 2015, I don't understand that we need the US and especially so the civil society, but in 2015, I think, if I'm not mistaken, so the Kyrgyz government has decided to close the PONARS Air Base, then in 2016, so the USAID was closed. I mean, was it a kind of, I mean, part of a big game? Was it part of a politics, or was it, I mean, kind of general indication of how we look at it as United States? I mean, please do everything you want, I mean, in terms of economic help, etc., but do not intermingle into our policy making, especially so do not promote the democratization agenda in our region.
Well, on the base issue, I think it's not much of a secret to say that that was not just the decision of Bishkek. That was a joint decision between, say, Bishkek and Moscow. There was, I think, and no one really made a secret of it. And it's linked to the domestic political developments in Kyrgyzstan of that time, with President Atambayev just fresh in power, with the 2010 events and Russia's role in making sure that those kind of events happened. So it was a reflection of the politics of that time, and less of a message from the Bishkek saying that stop doing this or that. So this is part of a bigger picture. Yeah, that's just particular on the base, but I don't. If there is anything else that you think indicates the Central Asians' desire to withdraw from the engaging with the United States, I don't see any examples. We have, of course, President Atambayev being very arrogant towards the United States in terms of supporting NGOs and supporting free media, saying that, okay, local, like Azatlık and so on, you have bosses in Washington, why you are keep asking these kind of bad questions, critical questions, and so on. That is typical of Atambayev personally, but also of the regime where when in opposition, he was benefiting from the same journalists, and when in power, it's typical of a regime where that is growing increasingly intolerant of critical approach. But overall, during Atambayev's period, even I don't think the United States was doing some tremendous democratization work. Not really.
And it's kind of to your mind, I mean, in terms of, do you think the US is interested in promoting democratization agenda in Kazakhstan? I mean, are they interested in terms of in promoting human rights in Kazakhstan, or is it not on the agenda of US?
I believe that the human rights and democratization agenda has been kind of present in U.S. foreign policy vision, and traditionally it has been kind of putting the democratization issue into the kind of one of the kind of 5 or 6 priorities towards Central Asia in general sense. I believe the geopolitics define also the kind of democratization agenda for U.S. And in this respect, I believe that democracy and all related issues towards this topic is still on the agenda in the US foreign policy and US relations with Kazakhstan. But priority-wise, if you look at the geopolitical aspects that actually influences the domestic policy in Kazakhstan or Uzbekistan, etc. So they I think, compare the stability, economic cooperation, and a more evolutionary approach in Central Asia towards democracy and human rights development. Still, U.S. works with NGOs in Kazakhstan and in Kyrgyzstan, depending on the country and more or less. And that's why I think this agenda is still on the platform in U.S. vision towards the region. And it's one of those kind of instruments of influence as well and cooperation. And that's why I cannot say that it has diminished in the region. But priority-wise, you see at this stage more kind of supporting mechanisms of launch reforms, specifically in Uzbekistan with new administration, and you see quite active engagement with Uzbek colleagues from the US side. And that's why in Kazakhstan, with the new administration, with the administration of President Tokayev and his political and economic reforms, I believe the US side is kind of cautiously welcoming them, the package of reforms, but still they would like to see the kind of the end result of that. So they cautiously watching and monitoring the situation. I believe that it's still on the agenda.
Thank you, Chris. So let's now move to the US foreign policy in its future. During the term of Joe Biden, who is being inaugurated tonight. So my first point, I would like to ask you. To begin this, I would like to ask you, what do you think? What are the issues, in your opinion, in US foreign policy in our region, which are most urgent, and what is on the agenda in 2021? Guys, do you have an answer to this question?
Can you repeat the question, please, once again?
Yeah, yes. Which issues, in your opinion, which issues in US foreign policy in our region you think are the most urgent right now, and what is on the agenda of US foreign policy in 2021? Do you have any information about this?
Well, in general sense, the Biden's administration should focus on the domestic agenda. Central Asia as a region is certainly in the foreign policy kind of vision of US, but certainly they need to focus on the new cabinet, how to combat the COVID-19 and the evidence and the facts that it's rising in US. So certainly the first policy act of President-elect Biden should to tackle these kind of challenging times. And we need to take into account that US society is still polarized, and there are many policy articles specifically for President Biden, how he should actually act in order to at least bring together to the common table the factions in the US Senate, for example, which is kind of under the Democratic majority now at this stage, or Congress in this respect. So it's a big work for President Biden-Harris administration, specifically how to work with the Senate, how to work with the Congress, how to work on domestic issues, and how US should re-engage into the multilateral framework, specifically on Iran issue, on the abolished Trans-Pacific Partnership, etc. So where China has promoted and where Japan has joined as well. So for US at this stage, it's domestic foreign policy to rejuvenate the Obama legacy on nuclear aspects. And one of the important points that Biden administration has to deal with is a New START agreement between US and Russia, specifically on the arms control treaty, which expires on the 5th of February this year, so next month actually. And it's a big challenge for US whether they agree with Russia or not, whether they should include China on this regard or not, because Trump's administration was pushing China to be part of this New START treaty. And this is kind of the biggest challenges for US foreign policy. And that after that, when they kind of will work with a new cabinet and deal with COVID-19, etc., the economic aspect, the society aspect, with domestic policy, Central Asia will be kind of one of these follow-up issues in this regard. And because it's pragmatic approach from the US side, it will carry on the Obama's legacy on C5+1, and we will not see big changes in this respect towards Central Asia.
To add to that, if completely agree, of course, as I also, Biden has his plate full. But if we stick to the question whether if Biden would do agenda for Central Asia, what would be the most urgent questions, then I think Uzbekistan, or engaging with Uzbekistan, will remain the biggest opportunity that the United States see. Same for Europe. They are still, I think, looking for ways how best to take advantage of the Shavkat Mirziyoyev's different approach to engaging with the world, greater openness, while retaining a very conservative pace in the reforms at home. So when the United States think of Central Asia, I think now they think about Uzbekistan and trying to take opportunity of getting relations reset somehow. So that's one of the bigger agenda. Second, I think United States will also keep an eye on Afghanistan, where situation is far from being settled, and the United States is far from having withdrawn from there, despite pulling out lots of troops. And the developments in Afghanistan, of course, will have potential implications for situation in Central Asia, in Tajikistan in particular. So Afghanistan will remain another. And the third, which would be probably less of what would happen, but rather what should be happening, I think United States and the Biden administration will be following the developments in Bishkek in Kyrgyzstan, a country which was a kind of success story in terms of how could efforts at democratization and building up the civil society capacity or developing the institution of elections has been more successful. But the developments since October demonstrate that there are interesting developments in Kyrgyzstan, and some questions are very curious and some might be very worrying. The country switching to presidential system, which in itself not necessarily something bad, but in Kyrgyzstan there is a consensus that, at least among the observers, there's a consensus that the presidential system will more quickly lead towards authoritarian, family-oriented, or kind of one-man rule as we had before 2010. And I think the United States, having already invested a lot in building up these political and public institutions, will have to follow the developments and try to make sense. So and there will be, of course, many more issues. The developments between Kazakhstan and Russia may be a kind of not really fundamental policy issues, but always make it interesting headlines with Gosduma MPs and the president of Kazakhstan kind of indirectly responding to them. I think those issues will be followed by all international actors and the United States including.
Shairbek, if I may follow up on this, so Joe Biden has promised, as a first act, to suspend the ban on Muslim countries. So, and how significant is it for Kyrgyzstan? Because Kyrgyzstan was put on the list of countries that finance terrorism. So it was done by Trump, and Biden has promised to undo this order, this ban. Do you think it has any significance for Kyrgyzstan? Oh, yeah, you make Mike.
Yeah, I probably missed part of the question, but I think it was about the visa restrictions that Kyrgyzstan was put on. Yeah.
Yes.
Right. Well, and actually, I don't know what Trump exactly precisely said on the issue, but the communication from the United States embassy here was that this is very much linked to the situation with quality standards of our passports, international passports. And I think we have been doing some progress already, soliciting the German company that would produce new passports for Kyrgyz citizens. I don't remember, I don't think that Kyrgyzstan see it as a result of the kind of so-called Muslim ban, where Trump's initial batch of countries were basically, the interpretation was that it was very discriminatory and dubious action from Trump. I think in case of Kyrgyzstan, the explanations have been much more technical and much more pragmatic, with so many issues and scandals, including criminal scandals, where Kyrgyzstan's passport emerged as being used by kind of illegally acquired and so on. So I hope that I think it's less on the United States side and more on the Kyrgyz side to demonstrate progress on the issue. And I'm quite sure that quite soon we should get out of the list.
Okay, so a more general question. So how significant is this? I mean, is that persons like Joe Biden or John Kerry had visited Central Asia before. So if I'm not mistaken, John Kerry had visited Tashkent in 2018 during the C5+1 meeting in Tashkent. And Joe Biden, he was in Bishkek in 2010 and even visited the American University of Central Asia, if you remember, Shairbek. So yeah, how significant is it? I mean, for us, I mean, to have Joe Biden being the so right now the president-elect, but in a few hours becoming the new president of the United States, how significant is that they visit us and know our region? Does it have any significance?
Well, it's difficult to say. I wouldn't overestimate the importance of those visits. They come in some capacities, and we know that Hillary Clinton was also at the AUCA very much in the very initial opening of AUCA. Biden, I don't remember. Of course, the personal visits probably will be somehow remembered, maybe, but I think in Central Asia, many people are gone with whom he was shaking hands, most likely, yeah. But I wouldn't expect something to be different because they had some kind of personal exposure to the region in the past. If you look at the foreign policy campaign and the presidential campaign and the foreign policy issues, I haven't heard anything about our broader region, except maybe Karabakh issues, I think, which erupted during the campaign period. Biden has not demonstrated that there is Central Asia importantly in his mind. So I wouldn't really expect that to play much role.
From my side, I believe that yes, I fully agree with Shairbek that we shouldn't overestimate the visits of diplomatic personnel or like officials from the U.S. side. It depends on the specific context of that time when he or she visited specifically our region. And what's interesting for me is that, as I mentioned before in the beginning of my kind of presentation, is that the White House National Security Council has kind of reinstated the Department for Russia and Central Asia, which will be headed by the Andrea Taylor, who was a former senior CIA agent, and she specifically worked on Russia. And the arrival of to the State Department of Victoria Nuland, who has her own kind of assertive stance towards Russia from the Ukrainian issue, etc. So we might see more assertive stance from the Biden administration towards Russia. And Biden has kind of numerously stated that Russia is an assertive actor. And if you look at the national security white paper strategy from the U.S. side and the military strategy of like U.S. military strategy, they designate Russia kind of and China as kind of challenges or as they call threats towards U.S. foreign policy. And that's why in this respect, this question is up in the air, how U.S. is going to approach China and Russia, and certainly it will affect us indirectly. And if the stakes will be higher, there will be another kind of indirect issues from the Moscow and Beijing sides vis-a-vis like its partners with whom you would like to kind of engage more, etc. So because similar aspect and similar pressure was put under the Trump administration on the France, for example, whether are you going to work with Huawei or not, or on Singapore, because Singapore has cut down its relations with like Huawei and its Singaporean company like Qualcomm has kind of terminated its relations. Or specifically the high-tech issue, high-tech sector will be on the agenda, like cybersecurity, trade between the like microchips, like all that aspects of high-tech rivalry between the big stakeholders will be on agenda. And hypothetically, if the stake will be higher and the rival tensions will increase, it's still possible that one of the stakeholders will say that you shouldn't buy like iPhones or you shouldn't buy like Xiaomi and Huawei. Otherwise, we will put a pressure on you, etc. So similar to the Iranian issue. Like if you will trade with Iran, we will have this kind of sanctions against you. So it depends. I mean, the context is changing very fast these days, and high technology is everyday kind of life. And what happens specifically with Zoom or other kind of platforms is also up to debate these days.
Iskander, I mean, the fact that we in Kazakhstan rely on fossil fuels very much, and the fact that Joe Biden will become the State Secretary for Environment will have any implications for us in Central Asia. I mean, for us in Kazakhstan in particular. I mean,
you mean John Kerry, yeah?
Yeah, John Kerry. He will become the State Secretary for Environment, as far as I know. So will be posting. Given there is a pledge, of Biden, I mean, to change, to pay more attention to the environment, to climate change, etc., will have any implications for us in Kazakhstan in terms of change. I mean, moving towards green energy sources.
Yeah, I mean, the green economy or environmental security is an important aspect, but also I believe this environmental issue will be linked to energy source companies. Kind of limitations and specific rules for the companies to abide with, and if you speak about the big giants, and it certainly affect the economy and climate. I believe in this respect is linked towards energy competition, the pipelines, all that stuff, like where we should go in this respect. So I believe that the Biden administration will kind of deal with kind of rising tensions on different fronts from its competitors.
Okay, guys. So perhaps one more question from me. So let's speak about the big players. So we have so lots of big players in our region. So China, Russia. How likely is it that U.S. will, will have any say in that constellation between China and Russia in future? I mean, what is your perspective on that question, so guys?
Like just to follow up, and I believe the U.S. is going to continue to be present and carry on its presence in the region. I mean, it's still at the capacity it can at this stage. Central Asia, I mean, it's important. Strategic important region, but I mean, it's not as important as we should expect from the U.S. vision. I mean, economically speaking, politically speaking, etc. So the U.S. would like to see the region to be kind of with enhanced cooperation mechanisms, with more connectivity in this respect, be it on cultural, economic, political levels. And this is one of this kind of main goals, and just to keep the sovereignty on the high agenda, and increase the democratic values and institutions to improve that. Speaking about the other stakeholders like China and Beijing, China and Russia, they have geographic proximity influence the relations between Central Asia and those geopolitical heavyweights, and that's why I see that U.S., China, and Russia will traditionally be trying to be more active in this region, and they have stated numerously that would like not to see a third party playing more active role in our region and not to just destabilize the regional activity process. So in this respect, there are many terms that being kind of coined, like this division of labor between Russia and China, where China is acting as an investment bank, Russia is the security like shield and soldier protecting the region. But I mean, the Chinese experts do not agree with this term, which was coined back in Moscow. But I mean, I believe the same goes with Central Asia. I don't see that we would like to be seen as a kind of an object of international relations, where we are being put, where we're divided into the sphere of influence. I believe the Central Asian republics should actually cooperate more actively in the region and provide a more regional vision towards different aspects like security, economy, like political cooperation in general sense. It's not easy process, but I believe even consultative meetings which were launched between the 5 Central Asian heads of states, like first was in Astana, Nur-Sultan, like the second was in Uzbekistan, and third should have happened last year in Bishkek, but due to the COVID-19 and the presidential elections and all that parliamentary elections, it has been postponed, and it's expected to be in Ashgabat in this year. So let's see how it's going to happen. But I mean, it's better to have more cooperation inside Central Asian region.
Yes, I think the issue of how the United States would react to China and Russia in the region has been pretty much discussed, so little to add. But what a couple of points could be added is, one, I think the United States will probably watching the developments and dynamics between Russia and China in Central Asia. That's far from being ideal and harmonious relations. Although up to the moment, both Beijing and Moscow have managed to avoid reaching any critical points. But over time, I think it will be increasingly more difficult to sustain. So the United States will be probably observing. However, I don't think we should expect much of capability and interest on the side of the United States to contain or limit or stop the influence or the engagement of China in Central Asia or Russia in Central Asia. The US is still too far away and has lots of other priorities, so that's not just going to happen. If we still keep thinking what US might do to help Central Asian countries to maintain some kind of distance with China and Russia, I think if we look at Caucasus, Georgia, there was a big topic of media and disinformation, basically helping the domestic media to escape the monopoly of Russian language or Russia-originated media. And I think in academic conferences, in publications, it's been clear that Russia's influence in the region is to a certain extent ensured by the common information space, let's say, the primacy of Russian language, the accessibility of Russian media, and the human interaction, people flying back and forth, particularly labor migrants. So the United States might want to be doing something in that area to diversify the sources of information that a person at a daily basis receives. But at the age of internet, I'm not really sure whether that's worth doing, but that's what's been done, I think, in some other countries. More generically, what the United States should be doing, I'm not sure whether they would be doing, but they should be doing, I think, is the supporting the sustainability of domestic economies as much as possible. For the 30 years, if there's one thing that we can say about the volume of international aid and development interventions, is that there was too much of efforts that was not embedded in local practices, local norms, so that whenever the funding, the project stops, the whole activity stops. So if we want some good, healthy change for the good of Central Asians, one area would be to help with developing domestic economies to the extent that there's a less migration, there's less need for the local budgets to depend on foreign infusions or foreign grants, foreign credits. That is not an easy task, and that's a headache and priority for Central Asian countries, not the United States or Russia or China. But this is the area where I think our governments need advice most, particularly I'm speaking for Kyrgyzstan and to less extent some other countries. But that's just what they should be doing, and what they would be doing is a separate question.
Thank you very much, guys. So let me take one question from our audience. So there's a question from Akylbaev. Democracy is a unique phenomenon, but not universal. What about the fact that many countries have experienced wars because of imposition of democratic values on their countries? And we will ever experience the sad experience of countries like Egypt and Syria. It reminds me of the article of Michael Fall, Democracy from Within. So what he was arguing that it's not about the US and promoting democracy values in your countries. It comes, I mean, to yourself. I mean, you have to, I mean, to come to this conclusion that we need democracy and democratize yourself yes, by own efforts. So, but how would you respond to this question from Akylbaev?
Well, I believe that each country has its own kind of cultural, historical dimension of its development, and I believe that democracy cannot be imposed. It should be kind of the part of the evolutionary approach and evolution of social development. And certainly, at some point, it's good that Central Asia is not at the part in the center of kind of geopolitical framework that's happening. Like Middle East for a long time has been, or North Africa, Maghreb was been a long time kind of center of power, kind of relations between of the great stakeholders. That's why it's maybe for our own good is just to be on the periphery at some point of great power relations and strengthen our kind of political institution, economic capabilities in this respect. But certainly at the same time, I don't believe that the social contract and the society is the same as it was before 30 years ago. I mean, the population of Central Asia has increased and passed the threshold of 70 million people. Like 30% out of those 70 million people are young generation with different mindsets and different values we see an advent of new elites in Central Asian republics, and all 5 Central Asian states has passed through its political transition. Some of them are still passing, and in this respect, the social contract, which was built during the Soviet time or was present in the beginning of 90s, is changing very fast, specifically in Kazakhstan. I mean, the social networks, the Facebooks, the Instagrams, WhatsApps has been accelerating the kind of social activities and civil society movement in general sense. And we see new public leaders, opinion leaders in different countries. That's why you cannot use kind of the old framework to engage with society. So the social norms are changing and culture is changing very fast. So that's why it's a very sensitive issue where you need to balance between the kind of broadening the social space and civil space for civil society and kind of ability to voice out your disagreement with the government policies. But at the same time, what's happening in Syria and Egypt is when the protests and all the that movement was hijacked but by different groups. And it's very tricky what happened in Iran, for example, or what happened in Syria where the protest opinion was led by the kind of secular democratic leaning groups, but it was hijacked by the ISIS, for example. So it's very sensitive issue and need to be very mature and conscious about different ideological aspects of that.
Yes, the whole issue of democracy democratization in foreign policy is big, and it could go into big philosophical debate. But one thing that we should also keep in mind is the context within which democratization appeared as a point of the agenda of the United States towards the world, and particularly towards Eastern Europe and former Soviet republics. For that, we should just remember what kind of state was the Soviet Union. One-party state, basically. And there are different other labels that I will not be listing here. So at that point in the 1990-1991, there was a general consensus that that regime collapsed. It was not only the collapse of a country named Soviet Union, it was the end of the political system, political regime. And none of the former Soviet republics proclaimed that we are going to retain the same system with Communist Party dominating and being the only legal allowed party. No, we all declared that we are going towards the democracy, and that was partly from us, partly basically enabled by the general environment that the United States, as the winning side of the Cold War, seeing the democratization as the way towards consolidating the change that happened with the Soviet Union's collapse, with the end of the Cold War. But that's only part of the story. I completely appreciate those responses about democratization being the tool for very pragmatic and not very good intentions in foreign policy oftentimes. We do acknowledge that in some the democratization is a very conflict-prone exercise, if you have a regime that is not going to budge, that's not going to just agree because of the pressure, if you keep encouraging, okay, voice your opinion, speak up, go to street, you're basically creating a space for conflict. Eventually, the issues of democracy, the issues of values is very much a domestic area of debate. Of course, values can never be imposed. The value is what you believe, right? So what the United States or Europe have been doing, or must have been doing, is the supporting the government's initiatives and civil society initiatives towards consolidating new institutions, new values, so that those values become part of institutions. However, it takes time, and I think Central Asia has been generally able to avoid major conflicts that would happen because of the political disunity over the democracy or over those kind of issues, except in Kyrgyzstan we had major tragic events, of course. In general, the Igerims was more of a comment, probably not less of a question, but I think everyone should appreciate that this is a potentially politicized, potentially manipulatable issue, but we also should understand the context within which it appeared in the agenda, and always place the agency in ourselves, that we are the ones choosing to deal with, be it USA, be it Russia, be it China. We are the ones who want to express what kind of relationship we want to have with our government. Do we choose the government, or do we treat it as for granted, and there are kind of 60 families circling around and becoming president and prime minister, and we just do our business? So this is about societal agreement. Unless we have domestic solution, all those external systems will not be effective. So yeah, this is going into a bit different topic, but and it's a good place to stop for me.
So gentlemen, thank you so much. So probably, yes, there's one more question, even two questions. One is from Professor Schminke. Sorry, I have some, sorry, not questions. From Mr. Bonvin, fully agree with development of the domestic economy, integration of regional economies. In this regard, water management should be looked at as an enabling factor. This is a factor of stability, of interest for the big godfathers. I think it's more like a comment, yes, about the importance of regional integration in Central Asia. Shairbek, Iskander, thank you very much for being with us for this great discussion. So certainly we could not address all questions that we have had on our agenda, but perhaps it comes because of that we had discussion in online format. It's very unusual. It's very unique and it's very unusual. Certainly, it's much better to have such discussions in offline format. But just to resume this meeting, so we talked about the U.S. foreign policy after U.S. presidential elections 2020. So one major, takeaway from this discussion is that the U.S. foreign policy is likely to remain the same. So the U.S. will likely to see kind of continuation of the previous approaches during the president, during the Joe Biden's term. But anyway, so let's hope that on the US side, we'll see kind of reevaluation of the engagement in Central Asia, but also on the part of Central Asia, we'll see kind of reevaluation of our approach towards US, and there will be more cooperation with the United States in future. And yes, let's hope for that. And thank you, Iskander, Akylbaev. Thank you, Shairbek Dzhuraev, for your inputs, for your expertise on that question. So, and I wish you all the best, and hope to see you in future.
Yes. Thank you, Shairbek.
Yes.
Thank you.
Thank you, Shairbek. Thank you, Iskander. Thank you. Bye-bye. Thank you to our audience. Yeah.